My name is Margot Sylvain Thibodeau. I am 41 years old. And the woman who just walked across that stage and accepted my award is my sister. The ballroom is the Olmsted in downtown Louisville. It is the kind of room that was built for exactly this kind of evening-high ceilings, chandeliers, the particular warmth of a space that has been carefully lit to make everyone inside it feel like they belong to something significant. There are 300 people in this room: chefs, restaurateurs, food writers, investors, the kind of people who decide what this city eats and what it remembers. I have been working toward being in this room, on that stage, for 9 years. Danielle is at the microphone now. She is wearing the black dress she borrowed from me in October and did not return. Her hair is done. She is holding my award, the Louisville Food and Hospitality Award for Best New Chef, which has my name engraved on the base, which I know because I watched them engrave it 3 weeks ago when the committee called to tell me I had won. She is saying the word we. Leon is to my left. He has a glass of water in his hand that he has not touched since Danielle's name was called instead of mine at the podium. He is looking at the stage with an expression I have never seen on him in 7 years, not anger, something more contained than anger, the particular stillness of a person deciding what to do with something that cannot be undone. 300 people are applauding. But here is what none of them knew. 16 months before that evening, I had filed a trademark application with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. The registration had been approved 11 weeks ago, and the federal complaint had been drafted and was sitting in my attorney's outbox, waiting for my signal. This is how it happened. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where we share real-life stories about family justice, quiet strength, and the moments that change everything. If this is your first time here, drop a comment and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a story. To understand what happened at that awards ceremony and what happened in a Louisville federal courtroom 14 months later, you have to understand what it takes to build a restaurant from nothing and what it means when someone who watched you do it decides to take the credit. I learned to cook in my grandmother's kitchen on Story Avenue in the Smoketown neighborhood of Louisville. Her name was Celestine, and she did not measure anything. She measured with her hands and her nose and 40 years of knowing exactly what a dish needed before it needed it. I watched her the way you watch someone whose knowledge lives in their body rather than their head trying to absorb not just the technique, but the instinct behind it. I was 8 years old, and I already knew this was what I wanted to do with my life, which is either a gift or a burden depending on the day. I went to the Culinary Institute of America at 22. I staged in New Orleans for 2 years, then in Chicago for 3. I came back to Louisville in 2011 because my grandmother was sick, and because Louisville's food scene was doing something interesting, and I wanted to be part of building it rather than arriving after it was built. Maison Thibodeau opened in March 2015. A 40-seat restaurant on East Market Street in New Southern French cuisine, the food of my grandmother's Louisiana roots, filtered through classical French technique, which is a sentence that sounds pretentious but tastes like something you have never had before and cannot stop thinking about. I know this because people tell me. They also tell me with their reservation lists, which have been full since the 8th month of operation. By 2022, Maison Thibodeau had a James Beard semi-finalist nomination, a Michelin Bib Gourmand designation, a valuation of $2.3 million, and a waiting list for weekend reservations that ran 6 weeks. I know these numbers the way I know the temperature at which a Beurre Blanc breaks exactly, and from experience. Leon Beaumont has been my head sous chef since 2016. He is 38 years old, and he is the best technical cook I have ever worked with, methodical, precise, constitutionally incapable of sending a plate that is not correct. He learned to cook in Baton Rouge and came to Louisville for a girl who left and for a kitchen that kept him. He has been at my right hand for 7 years, and I have never once had to tell him something twice. The kitchen smells like brown butter and fresh herbs, and the particular mineral smell of a well-seasoned cast iron pan. That smell is mine. I built it over 9 years of 6-day weeks and 14-hour days and decisions about sourcing and flavor and technique that I made alone at 2 in the morning with a notebook at the prep counter. I built it from my grandmother's hands and my own. Danielle is 3 years younger than me. She is 38. She grew up in the same house I did, ate the same food, watched the same grandmother. She did not learn to cook. She learned to be in rooms where cooking was happening, which is a different skill, socially useful, commercially legible, but not the same thing. She has a son named Theo, who is 9. His father has been inconsistently present since Theo was 2, and Danielle has raised him largely alone with support from me and our aunt. I helped her move 3 times. I lent her money twice that I described as a gift because I knew she could not repay it, and I did not want the debt to change how she felt around me. I gave her a part-time role at Maison in 2019 front of house, hostess and event coordinator, because she needed income, and I needed help, and I told myself those 2 needs aligned. They did not align as cleanly as I told myself. Danielle was good at the front of house. She was warm and memorable, and guests liked her. She also, over the course of 3 years, learned things that I did not intend to teach her. She learned which vendors I used and what I paid them. She learned my supplier relationships, the farms I had cultivated for a decade, the specific purveyors in Kentucky and Tennessee who gave me access to ingredients that other Louisville restaurants could not easily source. She learned the language of my menu, not the recipes, but the framing, the philosophy, the vocabulary I had developed to describe what Maison was and what it meant. I know this now, because I looked. I did not look carefully enough while it was happening, because I was working and she was family, and I had told myself a story about those 2 things being compatible. The first indication came in September 2022. A food writer I knew, a woman named Priya, who covers the Louisville restaurant scene for Louisville magazine, sent me a text that said, "Have you seen what's opening on Baxter?" I had not. I looked it up that evening. A new restaurant called Maison Sud, opening in January. Southern French concept, farm to table. The About page described the founder as someone who had spent years developing the cuisine of the American South through a French classical lens in one of Louisville's most celebrated kitchens. The founder was listed as Danielle Thibodeau. I sat with my phone for a long time. Then I went to work the next morning, and I did not say anything to anyone except Leon, who I told at the end of service while we were breaking down the line. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "What do you need me to do?" I said, "Nothing yet. I need to see the menu." The Louisville Food and Hospitality Awards ceremony was on the 2nd Friday of November. I had been nominated for Best New Chef, a category that measures not just the food, but the contribution to the city's culinary identity, and which I had been eligible for by the committee's 5-year establishment rule, for exactly 1 year. I had received the nomination call in August. I had not told Danielle. I had not told most people because I did not want to perform excitement before I knew the outcome. I found out I had won on a Wednesday 3 weeks before the ceremony. The committee chair called me personally. She said the vote had not been close. I said thank you, and I meant it, fully, the way you mean something you have been working toward for 9 years. The ceremony was black tie optional. I wore a dress I had bought specifically dark green, fitted, the kind of dress you wear when you want to feel exactly like yourself but elevated. I arrived with Leon, who wore a jacket he had borrowed from his brother and which fit him imperfectly, and which he did not care about. We found our table. We ate the dinner, which was fine. We talked to the people around us. At 9:45, the awards portion began. Best New Restaurant, Best Bar Program, Best Pastry Chef, And then the chair stepped to the microphone and said, "And the award for Best New Chef goes to," she looked at the card, "Margot Thibodeau of Maison Thibodeau." The room applauded. I stood up. And then I heard, from the table to my left, a rustling movement, and I turned and Danielle was already standing, already moving toward the aisle, already walking to the stage before I had taken a single step. I stopped. I watched her walk to the stage. I watched her take the award from the chair's hands. I watched the chair look briefly confused and then compose herself because she was a professional and the room was watching, and whatever confusion she felt, she smoothed it over in 2 seconds. Danielle stepped to the microphone. She said, "Thank you so much. We have worked so hard for this. We built Maison together and this means everything to both of us." 300 people applauded. I was standing beside my table with my napkin still in my hand. Leon was beside me. He did not move. He did not reach for me or speak. He just stood there present, still, a wall I could lean against if I needed to, and did not have to explain myself to. I sat back down. I set the napkin on the table. I picked up my water glass and I drank from it. Slowly, deliberately, and I looked at the stage where my sister was holding my award with my name on its base and telling 300 people that she had built what I built. I did not stand up. I did not walk to the stage. I did not make a scene in a room of 300 people who were watching and would remember. I sat there and I watched, and I was calm in the way that you are calm, when something is clarified so completely that there is nothing left to feel except the precise temperature of what needs to happen next. After the ceremony there were drinks and conversation, and the particular social circulation of industry events. People came to congratulate me, and I could see the moment of slight confusion on each face as they processed that Danielle had accepted the award, and then the social smoothing, the polite avoidance of the question none of them asked. I spoke to each person correctly. I thanked them. I smiled. Danielle found me near the bar at 10:30. She said, "I thought it would mean more coming from both of us." She said it like a gift she had decided to give me without asking if I wanted it. I looked at her for a moment. I said, "Good night." "Danielle, I found Leon." I said I was leaving. He walked me to the parking lot. He said, "You okay?" I said I needed a few minutes. He nodded and went back inside. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the Olmsted in my dark green dress and my chef's instinct and 9 years of 6-day weeks, and I did not move for 90 minutes. The engine was off. The lot was emptying around me. The Louisville November air was cold and visible at the edges of my windows. I did not cry. I thought about crying. Then I thought about the USPTO trademark application I had filed 2 months earlier, and the federal complaint in my attorney's outbox, and the 340 copied menu items in the forensic comparison document. I started the car. I drove home. I sent my attorney one text, "File Monday morning." I had started building the case before the awards ceremony. I need to say that clearly. The awards ceremony was not the beginning, it was the confirmation. The beginning was the September evening I looked up Maison Sud on my phone and read the About page and sat with it for a long time. The following week I went to the Maison Sud website, which had launched a soft preview with a sample menu. I printed the menu. I set it beside Maison Thibodeau's current menu and 2 previous seasonal menus. I read them side by side. 41 dishes on Danielle's menu. 37 had direct parallels to mine, not inspired by, not in the same general tradition, but parallel in construction, the same protein, the same primary accompaniment, the same preparation method, frequently the same descriptive language. My pan-seared duck breast with sorghum gastrique and pickled mustard greens appeared on her menu as pan-seared duck with sorghum reduction and house-pickled greens. My brown butter poached halibut with celery root pure and preserved lemon appeared as butter poached halibut with celery root and lemon preserve. I took the menus to an intellectual property attorney named Sandra Obi, who had an office on West Main Street. She was in her mid-40s, precise, with the particular directness of someone who has spent 20 years in a field where vagueness is expensive. She looked at the menus for a long time. Then, she looked at me. She said, "Recipes themselves have limited copyright protection. The list of ingredients is not copyrightable. But the specific creative expression of a dish, the written description, the plating concept, the branded presentation that can be protected. More importantly, your brand identity, your restaurant name's trade dress, the overall presentation concept, those are protectable and potentially infringed here." I said, "What do I need?" She said, "Trademark registration for the Maison Thibodeau name and trade dress, filed immediately. A forensic menu analysis documenting the specific similarities, documentation of your prior use, dated photographs, dated social media posts, dated press coverage establishing your original authorship. And we need to look at the investor situation." The investor situation. Danielle had secured $340,000 from 3 Louisville investors to open Maison Sud. I found this out through the Kentucky Secretary of State business filing, which is public record, and through a conversation with one of the investors, a man named Garrett Pruitt, who had also invested in Maison Thibodeau 4 years earlier, and who called me in October, uncomfortable, to tell me that Danielle had described the new restaurant to him as an expansion of the Maison brand, a second concept that I was developing with her. I had not been developing anything with her. Garrett Pruitt said he would not have invested if he had known the 2 restaurants were competitors rather than partners. He said he felt he had been misled. I said I understood. I asked if he would be willing to document what Danielle had told him. He said yes. Sandra filed the trademark application in October. I commissioned the forensic menu comparison in November. A culinary consultant named Richard Favre, who specialized in intellectual property cases involving restaurant concepts. He charged $3,100. I paid it from the restaurant's operating account and logged it under legal fees, which is what it was. Richard Favre delivered his report in January. It was 22 pages. He had cataloged 340 instances of similarity between the 2 menus across 3 versions of Danielle's menu: the preview, the opening menu, and the first seasonal revision. His findings addressed not just dish similarity but presentation language, menu architecture, brand vocabulary, and what he described as a consistent and systematic pattern of appropriation that exceeds coincidence or common influence and reflects direct sourcing from the plaintiff's established concept. 340 instances. I read the report at the prep counter at Maison at 6 in the morning before the kitchen crew arrived. The brown butter smell was already in the room from the previous night's service, settling into the walls the way it does. I read every page. Leon arrived at 6:30. He looked at the report on the counter. He looked at me. He said, "How many?" I said, 340. He said nothing. He put on his apron and started the morning prep. That was enough. That was Leon. The trademark registration was approved in February, 4 months after filing. The USPDO certificate arrived by mail in a flat envelope. I opened it at my desk in the restaurant office, a small room behind the kitchen that smells like paper and the ambient heat of a working kitchen. I held the certificate for a moment. Maison Thibodeau, registered, mine. I scanned it and sent it to Sandra with one line, ready. There was one night in all of this, a Wednesday in December, 6 weeks after the award ceremony, when I worked a full dinner service, sent the last table at 11:15, broke down my station, sat on an upturned milk crate in the walk-in cooler for 20 minutes, because it was the only room in the building that was quiet and cold and asked nothing of me. The shelves around me had the mise en place for the next day's service. The cooler hummed. I sat there in my chef whites with my eyes closed and did not think about anything specific. Then I got up and finished closing. For 16 months I showed up. Christmas was at our aunt's house in the Highlands. Danielle was there with Theo, who is 9, and who has his mother's warmth and none of her calculation, and who sat beside me at dinner and showed me a drawing he had made at school of a chef that he said was me. I told him it was excellent. I meant it. Danielle talked about Maison Sud. She talked about the opening, the reservations, the early reviews. She talked about it as a thing she had built using the first person, the possessive, the vocabulary of authorship. Our aunt said she was proud of both of us. Our cousin asked if we were going to collaborate on anything. I said, "We'll see." I helped Theo with his second serving of bread pudding. In February, Maison Sud was reviewed by Louisville Magazine. Priya, the food writer who had first texted me about the opening, wrote a review that described the cuisine as eerily reminiscent of Maison Thibodeau in concept if not quite in execution. She did not call it derivative. She was too careful for that, but the word eerily was there, and I think she put it there deliberately, as a signal to the people who would understand it. I sent her a text that said, "Thank you for the review." Nothing else. She wrote back, "I know what I'm looking at. When you're ready, I want to tell the real story." I wrote back, "Not yet." In March, there was a Louisville culinary community event, a charity dinner for the Southern Foodways Alliance, held at a venue in Butchertown. Both Maison Thibodeau and Maison Sud had donated dishes. I was there. Danielle was there. We stood at adjacent tables for 3 hours in the same room, and I spoke to every person who came to my table with the attention and warmth they deserved, and I did not look at Danielle's table unless I had to. At the end of the evening, she found me near the exit. She said, "It's good for both of us to be here. It shows we're both part of the community." I looked at her. I said, "Good night, Danielle." She held my eyes for a second, trying to read me, trying to find the version of me that was angry or hurt or available for the conversation she seemed to want to have. She did not find it. If this story is hitting close to home, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Your story matters too. The hardest moment came in April. Theo called me. He calls me on Sunday afternoons, sometimes not about anything specific, just to talk, the way children call the adults they trust. He told me about a field trip. He told me about a book he was reading. He said, "Mom says you two are going to do something together someday. Like a collab." I said, "Did she say that?" He said, "Yeah, she said you're working on something." I said, "That sounds exciting." My voice was level. After I hung up, I sat on my couch for a while. I thought about Theo at 9 years old, his drawing of the chef, his field trip, his book. I thought about what this was going to do to his understanding of his mother and his aunt, and the space between them. Then, I thought about 340 items, and a forged narrative, and 3 investors who had been told something untrue. I called Sandra the next morning and said, "How soon can we move to the federal filing?" The call came from Garrett Pruitt on a Monday morning in May. He said that Danielle had approached him for a second round of investment, $200,000, to open a second Maison Sud location. In Nashville, he said she had described the Nashville expansion as something she and I had been planning together. He said she had used the phrase the Thibodeau brand. I said, "Garrett, I need you to write down everything she said to you. Date, time, exact language as best you can recall. Send it to Sandra Obi today." He said, "I'm not investing. I want you to know that." I said, "Thank you. Please send it today." I hung up. I was in the Maison kitchen, standing at the prep counter at 8 in the morning, the kitchen empty before the day crew arrived. The brown butter smell was in the walls. The morning light through the street-level windows came in at the low angle it always comes in at this time of year, lying across the tile floor in a flat stripe. I thought about Danielle at the awards ceremony microphone. I thought about the about page of Maison Sud. I thought about the Thibodeau brand, said to an investor, used as currency for a $200,000 ask. I picked up my phone and called Sandra. She said, "The Nashville expansion changes the scope significantly. This is no longer just Louisville market infringement. This is a pattern of expanding misappropriation." I said, "File this week." She said, "Are you prepared for what comes next?" I thought about that for a moment, the kitchen around me. 9 years of 6-day weeks, the smell of brown butter and cast iron, Leon arriving in 20 minutes, the USPTO certificate in my desk. I said, "File this week." The federal complaint was filed in the Western District of Kentucky on a Thursday in May. Trademark infringement, trade dress violation, unfair competition, and fraudulent misrepresentation to investors. Sandra had prepared a 94-page complaint with 340 exhibit items, every menu comparison, every investor communication, every documented instance of misrepresentation. Sandra had recommended federal mediation before trial. The mediator was a retired federal judge named William Osai, based in Louisville, who had handled IP cases for 12 years after leaving the bench. The mediation was set for July. I arrived at the mediation office on West Main Street at 8:30. Sandra was with me. Danielle was already there with her attorney, a man named Paul Reeves, who had reviewed the complaint and, I could see from his expression when we entered, understood what he was dealing with. Danielle was in a gray suit. She was sitting with her hands on the table, and she did not look up when I came in. I sat down across from her. I looked at her hands on the table. They were still, deliberately still. The kind of stillness that costs something. I know Danielle's hands. I have known them my entire life. She used to stand at the sink when we were girls and wash dishes after our grandmother cooked, both of us, standing on the step stool because we weren't tall enough, her hands moving through the soapy water in the particular way of a child who has been asked to do something and is doing it carefully. After our mother left when Danielle was 7 and I was 10, and our grandmother took us in, she washed dishes every night without being asked. It was the thing she could do. Those were the hands on the table. Then she looked up and found my eyes, and the moment passed, and she was Danielle in a gray suit in a mediation room, and her hands were still, and I was on the other side of what she had done. William Osei opened the session with the particular economy of a man who had been in rooms like this for 30 years and knew that the documents would do most of the work. He reviewed the complaint. He asked Danielle's attorney 3 questions. Paul Reeves answered 2 of them and deflected the 3rd. Sandra set the Richard Favre report on the table. She set the USPTO registration certificate beside it. She set Garrett Pruitt's written statement beside that. She set the original Maison Thibodeau menus dated, photographed, documented in a stack that took 2 minutes to lay out. She said, 340 documented instances of appropriation, a federally registered trademark that predates the defendant's opening by 4 months. 3 investor statements describing misrepresentations made by the defendant regarding the plaintiff's involvement in and endorsement of the defendant's concept. A Nashville expansion pitch made as recently as 6 weeks ago using the plaintiff's brand name without authorization. She paused. She said, "The plaintiff is not seeking the closure of Maison Sud. She is seeking injunctive relief, requiring the defendant to cease use of the Thibodeau name in trade dress, a license fee for any continued operation under a distinct brand, damages for investor misrepresentation, and attribution correction in all existing press materials." Paul Reeves made an argument about culinary tradition and the shared influences of Southern French cuisine. Sandra set the forensic comparison open to page 7, which showed 17 dishes in direct parallel with identical descriptive language, and said, "Common culinary tradition does not account for identical plating descriptions or the phrase sorghum gastrique appearing on both menus in the same dish context." The defendant had access to the plaintiff's kitchen for 3 years. William Osei looked at Danielle's side of the table. Paul Reeves spoke quietly to Danielle. Danielle's jaw moved once. She shook her head slightly. He spoke again. She looked at me. I looked back at her. "I did not look away," she said, quietly, not to the room, just to me, across the table. "I just wanted something that was mine." I heard it. I understood it in the way I had understood it my whole life, Danielle wanting to be seen, wanting to be substantial, wanting to have built something rather than watched someone else build it. I knew that hunger. I had the same one. I had fed mine for 9 years with 6-day weeks and 14-hour days. I said, quietly, just to her, "Then you should have built it." The room was silent for a moment. Then Paul Reeves said his client was prepared to discuss terms. The resolution took 4 hours. The terms: Danielle would rebrand completely new name, new visual identity, no use of Thibodeau in any form. She would pay a licensing fee for the continued use of 3 dishes she could demonstrate independent development of, subject to Richard Favre's review. She would issue a corrected statement to all 3 investors clarifying her sole ownership and removing any reference to my involvement. She would issue a correction to Louisville Magazine and to the Food and Hospitality Awards Committee regarding the Best New Chef Award. The awards committee, as it turned out, had already been in contact with Sandra. They had been uncomfortable since November. The correction was something they wanted to make. Danielle signed the agreement at 12:40. She did not look at me when she signed. She picked up her bag, and her attorney held the door, and she walked out. I sat at the table for a moment after she left. Sandra was gathering her files. William Osei was reviewing his notes. I thought about Theo calling me on Sunday afternoons. I thought about the drawing of the chef. I thought about the dishes at the sink. Then, I stood up and put on my coat, and walked out into the Louisville July, which was hot and bright, and smelled like the river and like summer, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and let the heat hit me. Leon was parked on the street 2 blocks down. He had driven me. He did not know the outcome, but he had waited for 2 hours in the July heat without texting me once to ask what was happening. When I got in the car, he looked at my face. He said, "Good?" I said, "Good." He started the car. Neither of us said anything else for 3 blocks. Then he said, "Service starts at 5. I said, "I know." The injunction was formally entered in August. Maison Sud became, after 60 days of transition, a restaurant called Bayou Table. Different name. Different visual identity. Substantially different menu, reviewed by Richard Favre and confirmed to contain none of the 340 flagged items. It opened under its new name in October. The Louisville food community noticed the change and speculated about it, and Priya, at Louisville Magazine, wrote a careful piece about brand identity in the restaurant industry that did not name anyone, but which anyone who had been paying attention understood completely. Priya called me the week the piece ran. She said, "When you're ready for the full story, I'm still here." I said I knew. I was not ready yet. There was still Theo to think about, and the particular care required when the story involves someone's mother. The Food and Hospitality Awards Committee issued a correction in September. The 2022 Best New Chef Award was formally attributed to Margot Thibodeau of Maison Thibodeau. They offered to present the award again at the following year's ceremony. I said that wasn't necessary. They sent the original award to the restaurant by messenger, the one with my name on the base that Danielle had taken from the stage. It arrived in a padded envelope on a Thursday afternoon. Leon brought it to me in the kitchen. He set it on the prep counter without ceremony. I picked it up and looked at my name on the base and set it on the shelf above my station where I could see it during service. The 3 investors received corrected statements from Danielle's attorney. Garrett Pruitt called me afterward. He said he was glad it had been resolved. He asked how the restaurant was doing. I told him we had been fully booked since April and were considering a private dining expansion. He said that sounded right. Danielle called once, in October. She left a voicemail. She said she was sorry. She said she had told herself a story about what she was doing and had believed it longer than she should have. She said she missed me. She said Theo asked about me. I listened to the voicemail twice. Then I called Theo directly and asked about school and his book and whether he was still drawing. He said he was. He said he had drawn a new picture of the restaurant and would I like to see it. I said yes. I did not call Danielle back. Not yet. There was still too much between the call and the conversation I would eventually need to have. And I was not ready to have it. But I put the voicemail in a folder I did not delete. In November, exactly 1 year after the awards ceremony, Maison Thibodeau closed for 1 week for the first time in 9 years. I spent the week in New Orleans. I ate at restaurants I had been meaning to visit for years. I walked the streets of the neighborhood where my grandmother had grown up, which I had been meaning to do for longer. I sat in a cafe on Magazine Street on a Wednesday afternoon and drank café au lait and did nothing for 2 hours, which I have not done on a weekday afternoon since before Maison opened. I flew home on a Sunday. I drove from the airport to the restaurant. It was 6 in the morning and the city was still quiet. I parked on East Market Street, and I walked to the front door and I stood there for a moment. The brass nameplate beside the door read, Maison Thibodeau. Margot Thibodeau, chef owner. We had installed it in September, after the injunction, replacing the one that had simply said Maison Thibodeau, a small change, an addition of my name. Something I had resisted for 9 years because I thought the food should speak without the signature, and now understood was simply accurate. The morning light in November in Louisville comes low and gold across the Nulu storefronts. It hit the brass nameplate at 6:15 in the morning, and I stood there and looked at my name in that light and felt, for the first time in 16 months, something that was not vigilance or strategy, or the cold clarity of a person who knows what has to be done. Just mine. Just correct. Just what it had always been. I unlocked the door. I went inside. The kitchen smelled like brown butter and cast iron and 9 years. Leon arrived at 6:30 with coffee he had brought from the place on Frankfurt Avenue that we both pretend is too far out of the way and make the trip for anyway. He set a cup on the counter. He looked at me. He said, "Good morning, chef." I said, "Good morning." We started the prep. I used to think that generosity was uncomplicated, that opening your kitchen to someone, giving them access, giving them the vocabulary and the sourcing and the years of cultivated relationships, that doing this for family was simply what you did, and that the doing of it was its own complete thing, requiring nothing in return, carrying no risk. I do not think that anymore. Generosity has a structure. It requires boundaries the way a kitchen requires mise en place, everything in its place, clearly labeled, accessible to the right people for the right purposes. When I gave Danielle access to my kitchen, I gave it without structure, and what she took from it was not what I offered. That is on me. Partly, I know this. I am not absolving myself of the choices I made that made her choices possible. But I also built something. 9 years of 6-day weeks and 14-hour days, and my grandmother's hands and my own, translated into 40 seats on East Market Street and a waiting list and a brass nameplate in the morning light. I built it. Not we. I. There is a shelf above my station at Maison where I keep 3 things. A small jar of the sea salt I use to finish every dish, a photograph of my grandmother at her stove on Story Avenue, and an award with my name on the base. I look at all three of them during service. They are the accurate record of where this food comes from. I used to think that the worst possible outcome was conflict with someone you love. I now think the worst outcome is the version where you let the inaccurate record stand, because correcting it costs too much. The cost of correction was real. My relationship with Danielle is not what it was and will take a long time to become something else, if it becomes something else. But there is a brass nameplate on the door of my restaurant with my name on it in the early morning light, and the record is correct, and when Theo calls me on Sunday afternoons, I can tell him the truth about what his mother's aunt built and why it matters. That is worth the cost. That is my story. A chef who spent 16 months protecting what she built, and who learned that the most important ingredient in any kitchen is an accurate record of who did the work. If this reminded you that what you build deserves your name on it, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.